You're listening to ArchaeoEd, a podcast about the ancient civilizations of the Americas. I'm your host, Ed Barnhart. I've been an archaeologist, an explorer, and a seeker of esoteric knowledge all over the Americas for 30 years and counting. This podcast is just me, no guests to help me fill the airtime. Sometimes I'll teach you about the many civilizations of the Americas long before Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Other times, I'll tell stories of my adventures in the field. It's just me, freed from the podium and talking like we're just having a beer together. If that sounds good to you, then sit back, relax, and let me tell you a tale. Season 6, Episode 8, Rapa Nui. I just got home from leading an educational tour to Easter Island. I did an Easter Island episode way back in Season 1, so refer to that for some of the basics that I don't cover here. But I learned new stuff on this trip, so a part 2 was in order. I also figured this time I should call it what its local people do, Rapa Nui. But just to be clear, that's not its name either. Rapa Nui was a name given by French traders who thought it looked like another island named Rapa. Nui means big, so Rapa Nui is just Big Rapa. Frustrating that the modern descendants accept that their language and culture name is now Rapa Nui too, but that's the way history unfolded. According to their oral traditions, the name of the island is Tepito, meaning navel of the world, just like Cusco in Peru. Before I get into it further, a quick time and space clarification. Rapa Nui is a tiny island in the middle of the South Pacific. Most of its land is dominated by 3 big volcanoes. The people lived along its shores. It's part of the country of Chile, which is 2,800 miles to its east. The next closest inhabited island is Pitcairn, 1,300 miles to the west. It's truly one of the most remote places on the planet. Honestly, I really shouldn't even be including it in this series about the ancient Americas, but Chile owns it, so I'm going to take that as an excuse to talk about this island that I love. In terms of human occupation, 800 CE is the widely accepted start date. I hear a lot of people saying 600 CE, but I'm honestly not sure how much evidence that's based on. But for sure, by 800 CE, the Rapa Nui people were there. By 1000 CE, they started making the Moai statues and kept it up until the first European contact in 1722. Then, not surprisingly, their civilization descended into chaos and survival mode. The new things I learned were primarily from 2 good friends on the island, archaeologist Edmundo Edwards and Rapa Nui Renaissance man Nicholas Paccarati. I've known Nicholas, whose nickname is Paca, for about 7 years now. He's in his 30s and quite the character. He's whip-smart, multilingual, and seems to be related to 95% of the people on the island. He's a businessman, a cowboy, a farmer, an astronomer, a historian, and when he feels like it, a tour guide. By good fortune, he agreed to be the guide for my group. Much of what I'll impart here, I've learned from him. Edmundo Edwards is in his 80s now and has lived most of his life on the island. He's been there so long that he worked with Thor Heyerdahl. Also by good fortune, he agreed to give my group an evening lecture at our hotel. He's not just an expert on Rapa Nui's archaeology, but all over wider Polynesia. Though I was already familiar with that history in general, he connected some dots, or in this case, islands, for me. He talked about how and when Polynesian culture finally reached Rapa Nui. Their journey began around 6000 BCE, when people from mainland Southeast Asia started moving out into the islands, first Taiwan and the islands collectively called Austronesia. That Southeast Asian origin is made clear by their artifacts and the chickens, dogs, and pigs they brought out with them. Pottery was a big part of that too. It was first a mainland invention and then moved out into the islands as far as Tonga and Samoa. Those islands are technically Melanesia, which is west of where Polynesia begins. The farther and smaller islands got east, the less clay there was. Lots of them were fully volcanic, so no clay at all. No clay, no pottery. And yet, the Lapita culture from 1600 to 500 BCE spread pottery to all of them. That proved continuous, frequent boat travel between distant islands. By the CE period, humans had pushed into Polynesia proper, places like Fiji and the Marquesas, and pottery disappears. Pigs, chickens, dogs, taro, and yams continue, and they're all products from mainland Asia, so the deep heritage connection remained. They had done all that pushing east in outrigger canoes, but they hit a wall. The farthest islands, like Hawaii and Rapa Nui, were just too far out for outrigger canoes. This is where Edmundo's research was enlightening. In his estimation, it was the invention of the catamaran that changed that. Exactly when and where the first catamarans were made is unknown. It's hard to find their perishable remains in the ocean, but probably Western Polynesia. The internet is full of stupid accounts of Europeans discovering the catamaran in the 1700s, but it was invented by the sailors of Oceania centuries earlier than that. In Edmundo's opinion, it was that new boat design that let them travel the thousands of miles out to Rapa Nui sometime around 600 to 800 CE. It's also a logical explanation of why they didn't make it there earlier. Edmundo went on to discuss the recent discoveries of Polynesian DNA skeletons in dunes along Chile's Pacific coast, and a chicken from around 1000 CE. I still haven't run down those studies to read them myself, but I see little reason to doubt the word of Edmundo Edwards. And to me, it just makes sense. Even before hearing that evidence, there's been long-standing and increasing evidence of contact between Polynesia and South America. Back in the 1940s, Thor Heyerdahl's famous Kon-Tiki expedition was about proving South Americans could reach Rapa Nui. He used the presence of sweet potatoes as further proof of his theories. But the question remains, who contacted who? Was it the South Americans whose major civilizations developed in the Andes Mountains? Or was it the ancient world's best sailors who had been pushing further east for millennia in bigger and better boats? And by the way, Heyerdahl's boat didn't actually make it to Rapa Nui. It was blown way off course and smashed into an atoll. And he was trying to prove that a white-skinned, blue-eyed race he called Toki colonized Polynesia way before the Polynesians themselves. That doesn't directly relate to the question of first contact. I'm just saying that Heyerdahl was way off the mark, physically and theoretically. Okay, first commercial break here. When I return, some new things I learned on the island itself. People ask me for book recommendations all the time, and I've got one for you. It's written by my friend Matt Savino and called Land Without a Continent. In 2018, he drove his FJ Cruiser from Los Angeles all the way to Panama. Land Without a Continent is a very humorous account of his adventures. He meets interesting people, explores breathtaking landscapes, and gets himself in a pickle or two. Along the way, he visits a dozen Mesoamerican ruins and does a great job explaining them. I can attest to its accuracy because I'm his fact checker. I've done some boring editing jobs in my time, but Matt's book had me in stitches. His sudden pop culture references are laugh out loud funny. And his archaeology research was so good that even I learned a thing or two. The book ends with an insightful and positive message on U.S. immigration, a subject near and dear to my heart. Part humorous travel log, part adventure story, and part history lesson, Land Without a Continent has something for everyone. You can find it on Amazon or wherever you buy books online. I'll also put a direct link to it in my show notes. Land Without a Continent by Matt Savino. Give it a read. I'm back. I'm sure that commercial was very compelling. So let's talk about moai and ahu. Ahus are the big long platforms that the megalithic moai statues stand upon. But ahus aren't just moai stands. There are a total of roughly 330 ahus across the island, and only about 1/3 of them have moai. They're also the focal points of clan village plazas and the places where bodies of important leaders were buried. On another level, they're the finest examples of Rapa Nui architecture. Many of them are built with finely fitted megalithic stones. Vanapu is the most famous example. In fact, it's so nice that people say it was Inca-inspired. But there are many other similar examples that the internet just never talks about. Most ahus are built with a gently sloping front side. On that slope are smooth, round stones taken from the beaches and smoothed by water action. They're called poro, and oral tradition says they emit a kind of spiritual energy. The front patios of Rapa Nui houses also have poro stones. Maybe the ones on the ahus with the moai on top are symbolic moai houses. I'm just guessing there. A final thing to note about ahus is that they aren't unique to Rapa Nui. We find them on many Polynesian islands. Elsewhere they're called marae, but they're the same forms and the same locations on the main sides of public plazas. Moai, on the other hand, are unique, well, at least in terms of their size. In form and purpose, they're just kind of mega tikis. Both moai and tikis are statues to honor and connect with the ancestors. Moais, in very simple terms, are just giant versions of tikis. Our best guess about why they're so big is an amusing game of Rapa Nui, very human, one-upmanship. Both archaeology and oral tradition say that the earliest moai were the smallest, about the height of a normal human. Then they got bigger and bigger over the centuries. The tallest exceeded 10 meters in height. Near the end of the moai period, they were given an addition of big red stone hats called pukao. The French were the ones that called them hats. According to the Rapa Nui oral tradition, they're actually red hair with top knots. The names moai and pukao also have some interesting meanings in the Rapa Nui language. Moai translates roughly for sex, implying that they're giant phallic symbols. Pukao means roughly vagina, and indeed they're carved with a vagina-shaped hole to securely fit them onto the moai heads. And before you get offended by that, don't shoot the messenger. Rapa Nui told me that, not some sex-crazed anthropology book. The moai cult, as it's called, went on for centuries, conservatively from 1000 CE into the 1700s. It may well have started a few centuries earlier, but it's almost certain that European first contact triggered its end. I've been to the island 4 times now, the first in 2014. Back then, our moai count was 887. As of this year, being 2025, our count is now 1,043. I wondered, how did we get 153 more in just a decade? Well, some of them were chunks redefined as representing complete individuals. Others were found in excavations, like the one found in the dry lake bed inside Ranararaku crater in 2023. But Paka clued me into the other major source, inside the ahus themselves. The Rapa Nui don't want foreign archaeologists digging into their ahus, and no one has done it in decades. But then in 2017, they got control of their own patrimony from Chile and formed their own preservation institution called Mauhanua. During their own excavations and consolidation efforts, multiple phases of major ahus were discovered, and within them buried moai. Their locations and smaller sizes both indicate that they're very early moai, which is exciting. Big picture, those discoveries imply that there may be many more moai and the hundreds of completely unexcavated ahus. Pretty exciting. But the Rapa Nui will decide if we go looking for them or just leave them to their slumber. Perhaps the most exciting thing that I did this last visit was hiking the northwest coast along the base of the island's biggest volcano, Terevaka. There are no roads out there, nor people, just amazing archaeology and a ton of wild horses. It's 10 miles of coastline and the territory of what was the island's most powerful and wealthy clan, the Miru clan. No one goes out there, and I was dying to see its settlements for myself, and they did not disappoint. Not even Paka knows that part of the island well, but luckily his brother Sevi is one of the leading experts on it. He's been documenting petroglyphs out there for a few years now and agreed to lead us. 5 brave and hardy members of my tour group chose to join us for what turned out to be a 6-hour hike. As I suspected, we encountered some of the largest and most finely built ahus on the island. 2 had megalithic blocks that were 10 tons or more, stretching for meters across intact walls. All were original, untouched by archaeologists. There was a beautiful basalt moai lying in front of one of only 6 basalt moais known. The rest are volcanic tuft from Ranararaku crater. One of the other basalt moai is standing in the British Museum. The Rapa Nui call him the stolen friend. They've asked for him back many times, but the museum refuses. I was particularly struck by 2 moai, both over 8 meters tall, just abandoned during transport far from their ahu destinations. I asked Paka and Sevi why they did that. They replied that they had to abandon them when the Civil War suddenly began. The exact year is lost, but it was sometime shortly after the first European contact. The entire island went nuts, clans attacking clans in a chaotic war that lasted for decades. They hid in caves from each other and built fortifications. Bodies once cremated and burned in the ahus were now hastily buried in rock piles nearby or on top of their abandoned platforms. Let's take a moment to contemplate this moment in Rapa Nui history. They had lived on the island for centuries in virtual isolation. I'm sure there was occasional contact from Polynesian sailors, but virtually none. Their population had swelled to perhaps 20,000 people, and their over-harvesting of wood had left the island treeless. And then, out of the blue, European ships began arriving. Hairy white guys on massive ships with steel weapons and guns. Some land, easily capturing and killing the Rapa Nui as they pleased. And then they were gone. It must have felt like an alien spaceship had landed. Can you imagine how badly that shattered Rapa Nui's worldview? To make matters worse, European diseases were introduced. That probably made it appear as if their gods and their ancestors had abandoned them. So on top of overpopulation and resource strain, now they had the looming threat of European attacks and disease. It's no wonder society devolved into chaos and violence. Oral tradition says the war began suddenly, and work crews transporting moai had to abandon them and defend themselves. That's why they're laying along Rapa Nui's roads, and a bunch are still waiting in the quarry. The war went on for decades, and during it all, the moai standing on ahus were pushed down. When they do come to a truce, again, year unknown, it's through the adoption of the Birdman competition. It was called Tangata Manu, and all the clans of the island participated. Each clan put forth a champion for a deadly annual competition. They raced to be the first to a tiny offshore island to collect an egg of a seasonal sooty tern bird. They started at the top of a cliff at a village named Orongo, racing down its face to the water below. Then they swam out to get the eggs. At that point, there were no rules. The first champion to climb back up the cliffs and put an unbroken egg in his chief's hand won the title of Birdman. More importantly, his clan got to make the island's resource allocation decisions for the whole next year. The window for that Civil War-turned-Birdman competition is about 100 years. In 1724, James Cook saw the moai still standing. But by 1825, the HMS Blossom found them all pushed down and the Birdman competition was in full swing. It continued until the 1860s, when a Peruvian slave trader raid stole 1,500 people from the island and left the rest a few deadly epidemic diseases. It got worse from there until at one point there were only 111 Rapa Nui people left on the island. And yet, they survived. Today, there are over 5,000 people of Rapa Nui heritage living on the island. All right, I'll take my last commercial break here, and when I return, I'll tell you what I've learned about those modern folks. Hello, ArchaeoHeads. I'm proud to announce that I have a new YouTube channel. It's called simply Archaeologist Ed Barnhart. It's like what I do here with the ArchaeoEd podcast, but now with videos and photos. My new channel will start with 4 posts a month. Once it gets rolling and questions start coming in, I'll start answering them in a 5th monthly post. You know how this works. I need lots of clicks to get the YouTube algorithm to notice me. And that's where you come in. If you're listening to this podcast, well, I'm sure you're going to like that stuff too. I'll put a link to it in my show notes, or just search YouTube for Archaeologist Ed Barnhart. My new channel will be buried in there somewhere. I'll look forward to your feedback. Please leave me some comments and questions. For the last part of this episode, I want to talk about what far too few discussions of Easter Island include: the modern Rapa Nui people. The hotel I kept my tour group in was owned by an old man named Chef Joseph. I asked him to cater a final dinner for our group at the hotel, which he did magnificently. After the party, he approached me and we talked about modern Rapa Nui challenges. He was a boy when major changes came to the island. In 1954, the European sheep farm that had dominated the whole island for decades finally came to an end. But the Chilean Navy immediately took control of the island and continued to confine the Rapa Nui to the tiny town of Hangaroa. In 1966, for the first time, they were granted Chilean citizenship. But beyond building the first airstrip on the island, Chile did little for them. Joseph said Hangaroa still had no electricity and no running water. He remembers candles for light and cooking over horse dung. Then the Americans showed up. In an agreement with Chile, the U.S. Air Force set up a base they named the Center for Ionospheric Research. Their agenda there was said to be about space research, but it was also about the space race with the Soviets. But that's for a completely different kind of podcast. For the Rapa Nui living in Hangaroa, it meant their entry into the modern world. Joseph said it was the Americans who paved all the roads and established the first electrical grid. They also put the city's first plumbing in and a sewer system. I hadn't known that, and it was really nice to hear that America had assisted the Rapa Nui in those important ways. As time went on, Allende kicked the Americans out in 1970, but the dictator Pinochet invited them back in 1973. This time, both the Air Force and NASA returned to Rapa Nui. Initially, NASA was there for space capsule rescue missions. If they landed somewhere in the Pacific, they could get to them in time. But when they developed the space shuttle, they shifted to developing an emergency landing site. In 1985, they lengthened the airstrip to 1,100 feet and opened the Mataveri International Airport. To this day, there's a NASA base on the island, hidden in a compound on the outskirts of Hangaroa. They never had a single space shuttle landing, nor any call to action. Nevertheless, there's still an American contingent of soldiers there to this day. But it was the airport they built that opened up modern tourism. By the 1990s, thousands of tourists were landing every day, Hangaroa filled with hotels and restaurants. Unfortunately, most of those businesses were owned by rich Chileans from the mainland. The archaeological sites were managed by the Chilean Forestry Department on an island that had virtually no trees. The Rapa Nui became impoverished second-class citizens on their own island. By 2015, they had had enough and protested. They protested their lack of control of the island and their lack of control of immigration. Supported by most of the community, the Rapa Nui Parliament blocked roads and shut down tourism completely. They demanded control of their ancestral lands and immigration reform. And they won. In 2017, control and profits from the tourism went to a newly formed Rapa Nui institution called Mau Hanua. To this day, they maintain and protect their ancestral lands. But challenges for the Rapa Nui are far from over. Joseph worries that tourism is putting too great a strain on the island's limited resources, especially water. His math was compelling. If there are about 9,000 permanent residents on the island and 1,000 tourists arrive, that's a 12% increase and corresponding drain on their water supply. And more tourism, which is almost inevitable, will lead to a greater strain. The island has natural springs, but rainwater catchment is increasingly common to make up the growing deficit. There's a crater lake inside volcano Rano Kau, but it's dramatically lowered in just my decade of visits to the island. If climate change lowers their rainfall, they could be in big trouble. In fact, the entire island's ecosystem is fragile. The majority of the island's plants and animals have been introduced in modern times. Horses, cows, goats, cats, all introduced in modern times. The reforestation of the island is in full swing, but with mostly foreign trees. A eucalyptus forest in the center of Rapa Nui is growing fast, but eucalyptus are very water-hungry trees. Bird species use it as a habitat, but domestic cats are killing them at an alarming rate. Modern crops like corn, squash, and melons have required beekeeping for pollination, and that's thrown the insect balance out of whack. The population of wild horses is out of control. Paka, who owns 17 horses himself, says it's over 10,000 horses now, outnumbering humans. They roam the ancient villages, grinding down the archaeology with their hooves. Out on the north coast, I saw fallen moai covered in horsehair where they scratched their itchy bodies. The entire Rapa Nui ecosystem is like some kind of Frankenstein monster brought back to life. But despite that, it's not all gloom and doom there. The Rapa Nui preserve their oral traditions and continue to grow in population. 3 years of isolation during COVID increased their self-reliance and renewed pride in the island's natural abundance. Mau Hanua has a vibrant team of young administrators and archaeologists who are caring for their ancestral patrimony like never before. While I was there, they were overseeing their first Hollywood deal, which I hope was really lucrative for them. It's a Netflix movie called Wild Horse 9, and it should be out this coming fall. Big name actors, John Malkovich, Steve Buscemi, Parker Posey, and Sam Rockwell are part of it. Some of my Rapa Nui friends are playing extras. I can't wait to see it. I'm going to end this episode by highlighting 2 Rapa Nui programs that I think are great. The first is Toki Rapa Nui Music School. It's a school for Rapa Nui kids to learn music, both classical and their own traditional music. It's led by Mahani Tive, a Rapa Nui woman who became a world-class pianist. She could have settled in Paris or anywhere, but decided to return to her island and use her gifts to enrich her community. To me, that's the act of a true hero. Not only is Toki Rapa Nui a music school, but it's also a model of eco-friendly architecture. Based on a system called Earthship Biotecture, it was built almost entirely out of recycled materials from the island, and collects thousands of gallons of rainwater from its roof. I visited them again this trip and found them struggling financially. My group made a donation to the school, and I hope that you'll consider making a donation to them too. I'll put their website in my show notes, and please just take a look at the beautiful things they're doing. The other program I want to mention is my friend Paka's stargazing tour. He was good to me, and I promised him I'd mention it here. I booked it for my group, and I was blown away. He and his team set up high-powered telescopes right next to an ancient Rapa Nui astronomy tower called a tupa. They explained Rapa Nui nautical astronomy, pointed out their constellations, and we took turns at the telescopes. It was also a catered affair. They had beer, wine, hors d'oeuvres, and fresh fish cooked on a grill right there. I've done a lot of stargazing parties in my time, but this was hands down my favorite. You know, it's kind of unlikely, but if you find yourself in Rapa Nui with time to spare, give Paka stargazing a try. Until next month, this is Ed, signing off. You've been listening to ArchaeoEd, a podcast about the ancient civilizations of the Americas. If you like what you heard, please click like, subscribe, and tell your friends. If you didn't, don't do any of that stuff. ArchaeoEd is written, recorded, and produced by me, Ed Barnhart, and it's owned by my company, Ancient Explorations, LLC. ArchaeoEd is my intellectual property, all rights reserved. Copyright 2025.